Welcome to the Extraordinary Podcast, where we identify God's uncommon work in common life. Recognizing God's work requires intentionality, but articulating it motivates and inspires. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Larry and Phyllis West, who were missionaries for 30 years, and they share stories about what it was like being a missionary to ways of how local churches and individuals in the United States can support those who are on the mission field. So let's get into the conversation today. Larry and Phyllis, thank you for being guests on our podcast today. We appreciate your willingness to share and your willingness just to invest here in the people of Burlington. So thank you for being here. And as you begin, could you share your call to ministry? Could you tell us about that?
Go ahead.
We had been married and lay people in the church for quite a long time, quite a lot involved. We already had 3 children, and we felt some unsettledness, didn't know what it was about exactly, but God called Larry to ministry. He didn't tell me right away. When he did tell me, it was a pretty big surprise. I was not really ready for that. So it was a major change for us, but he went back to school. And it became clear that really was God's call, and we embraced it, and it was a good thing. About a year later, Larry went on a youth and mission trip, or a work and witness, or a mission trip to a very small country, and he went to the interior. And when he got back from that, it really touched his heart. He saw the need for pastoral training was huge. And so he said, Phyllis, you have to go back with me. And, you know, we were not rich folk. He was in school and we had 3 children. And I thought he was crazy, but we did go back. We left our children with our relatives for a week, and we went back to the interior, and what we saw changed our world, really. We came back and we could never get away from it. And a few weeks after that, God called both of us to missions, but he called us separately. And so we didn't talk about it because we had made an agreement.
Yeah, when we were in this little country, we were there for a week together, and we saw how difficult it was to be missionaries.
At least in that context.
At least there. And on the way home, we both vowed that we would never be missionaries. We said we would support missions strongly in the local church, but let somebody else go.
So when God made it really clear that he had called us, we didn't want to talk about it. So finally he talked to me, and when it was a confirmation that it was definitely God's call, because we both had strongly felt it. And so we moved on from there, did school and all the preparations we need to so that we could do what God had called us to. And we've been thankful for it. It's been a joy.
Now, people who are listening may notice that you're leaving out details like the name of the country or stuff like that. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, actually, you know, for the work and witness thing that we did, I think it's just a habit to leave out the name. That's no secret. We went to Belize. But because of where we did our missions work, it was not a creative access, but restricted access. And that meant that if you looked on the Nazarene website for us in the missionaries, you'd never find us. We could not openly be missionaries because of the visa situation. So we just kept our name and our country very low profile.
Can you share a little bit about what that was like, trying to make sure you were careful in those regards?
Well, actually, you know, in a lot of ways, it was, if I'm honest with you, a lot of ways it was hard because everybody wants to know. Everybody wants to know. And people who know you always ask, well, why isn't your name on the Nazarene website? And and sometimes we would go to churches and they would say, well, how come you can't tell us, how come we can't record this? And that did make it difficult at times. But we always felt like we were right where God wanted us to be, so it was all right with us.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I just wanted to make sure that people knew that there was this was a bit, in some ways, a bit of a different missionary assignment than other places. But could you share with us, what is it like being a missionary?
There's a lot of change and adaptability. If you go expecting to settle down and have a predictable life, that's not where it is. Yeah, that was one of the big things I noticed.
You have to be able to live with ambiguity. If you're the kind of person that has to have a plan that's, step by step for a long time down the road, you're going to go crazy on the mission field. You have to be willing to live with ambiguity.
And always being a learner. Yeah. Always living in two worlds and loving them both.
Actually, in many worlds, because where we served, there were about 350 different people groups, and they all had their own culture. And anytime I moved from one people group to another, then I had to work in a new culture.
Our world is big. We love a lot of people. We have it's a big world, people-wise. But it's been a special joy with the long-term perspective. At the end of our time of service and looking back over the many years, that perspective is hugely rewarding. Yeah. And I imagine it is for anybody in ministry, but that's really for us where the reward has come is at the end of our service when we look back. That's been a real joy.
Now, so you spoke to some of the difficulties, ambiguity, uncertainty, different cultures, and some of the blessings of looking back and seeing the impact and just the privilege of what to be in ministry with people. Are there any other blessings that you may have experienced as missionaries that someone who's not a missionary might not expect?
Well, I don't know if they would expect it or not, but the relationships, the deep relationships that you develop with people, and watching them grow and helping them to be everything that God has for them to be. And, going to a different culture and living in different culture opens your eyes to your own culture. And that's a blessing in its own way. You learn to have a wider view of the world, so to speak.
Yeah. It's a blessing when you confront a situation and it feels like it's impossible and God fixes it. When you see people that are believers and there's no way they should have come to believe in Christ, but they did, and their lives were changed. That's a joy. That's a blessing.
I've had the privilege of baptizing people in the ocean, in drainage ditches, in swimming pools, in ponds and streams, and occasionally in baptistries. We've had a lot of interesting experiences.
Are you able to share? Is there a story or two that you might be able to share
about a Baptist?
Something from ministry that was, whether it's a victory that God gave or just something that was a meaningful experience for you, your family, or church.
There's a lot.
Yeah. So We were heavily involved in our theology school there. And it came to a point where it had just had some pretty significant difficulties, and it was down to 13 people, 13 students. And it appeared that the school was going to close down, and that was a really important aspect of the ministry for the church there. But God did something that was really special. He put two people we would have never guessed, especially the one of those two that was just, we would have never guessed. God put that person in just the right place in administration, and in a few months, the direction of the school was completely changed. And now we have 120 students probably, and a master's degree to bachelor's degree and master's degree. And then there's also a long distance pastoral training program with maybe 30 more people in it. It was just a real complete turnaround, and it was an important one. So that's one. Districts, the growth in.
Oh, yes. Yes. Really, my main assignment was to expand our work in the country where we were. And when we got there, we had one district there. And over the years of working, we now have 5 districts and 4 pioneer areas, and every one of them is a story. Every one of them has some special things that we just treasure in our hearts, because, that God gave us that opportunity to do this.
There was great need for leaders when we got there. I mean, everywhere needs leaders, but there was just a huge need for leaders, and God has really raised up a host of young leaders that really love the Lord and love the church and are gifted. God's really done a work in the raising up emerging leaders. That has been a true victory. That's been a real joy.
Yeah. That's good. It's good. Well, I appreciate you sharing a couple of stories, and particularly seeing the growth and sustainability that God does for us is always encouraging to know that we're part of something that's bigger than ourselves, that even after we leave, God is doing a greater work. And you guys are recently retired from full-time missionary work. And nobody retires from Jesus. We're also but can you share what retirement from full-time missionary work means to you guys?
Well, this might surprise you, but for the first few months, leaving the field was a grieving process. We left behind 30 years of relationships, of people that we love, they love us, and it was like losing something very valuable. The work is going on, they're doing great. It's exciting to see what they're doing, but you feel that loss. And those first few months, that's what it was for me, was working through a bit of a grieving process.
And the flip side is then you come home to your other home and you get to be near your family at holidays and birthdays and see them grow and have closer relationships, and that's the flip side. That's the true joy that you come home to. So other than that, it's transition, a lot of learning, how people think and how to get things done, and deciding what roles you are going to have. And we're still in that process. So it's a lot of change. I mean, that's what we've been doing for a long time. So it's just more change.
Now, as you're retired from the field at this point, you can answer this question with no self-interest. But one of the things that it can be difficult for someone like me or people who are in the States of how to support missionaries overseas. We can talk about prayer. We can talk about giving financially. Are there any other ways that people meaningfully supported you guys?
One of the ways, there's lots of ways, but one of the ways, believe it or not, is just sending a simple card in the mail or sending something and just saying, we know you're there, we're praying for you. There are times when we were going through some really difficult situations, and a card would come and we'd feel encouraged. And it seems like it's a little thing, but it really does make a difference.
Sticking in the card something, that slips in a card, that fits in a card, that was always, oh, they did something a little extra. That was nice of them, Our children, when they were still at home, when they got gifts from people they didn't know, that was really a blessing to them. Oh, somebody knows we're here. Somebody really cares about us. That was meaningful.
Yes.
And sending cards and letters and praying for us when there was not enough people to do the work that needed to be done. And so we were very busy people and couldn't keep up with correspondence. And it's important. I understand that, but I just couldn't. And just people writing anyway, even though they haven't heard from us, that was special.
No, that's an excellent point. Just not being forgotten.
Yeah.
People saying, "Hey, we know you're there," and that you're being cared for, and a nice thing with something like a letter. There's not an implied response required. If you send a text message or an email, there's a hey, thanks, and it's like you feel like you're obligated to do something. But a letter is it doesn't necessarily. Maybe that's a generational thing. Maybe
yeah, it's true.
But that it is nice. So just tangible ways to make sure that missionaries know that they are not forgotten and that there are people that are thinking of them, are supporting them, and just encouraged by their work. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. That was a really
I would say that text messages work too. They're good. They're good.
We couldn't get those when we started out, though.
Yeah. And then you pay for them every time you got one after those days. Well, one question for you is, as you think about whether it's your years of ministry on the field, whether it's being back from the States, what's giving you hope about the church right now?
Oh, man. There's a lot of things. When we see pastors who love where they're at and the people they're serving, and we see that often, and we see that, we go, there's hope. There is hope for the church.
When we've worked with young people and we see them being mentored and then they go and do the same thing better than I could do it, that's really exciting. I found out in serving that young people are ready to serve. They really are. And if you walk alongside them and serve with them and then send them out and they'll do it. They just will do it. And that's a real joyful thing. That brings hope.
Yeah.
God's at work.
Yes. And as we have worked with young people and watched them go out, help them to go to new places to plant churches and to work among a new people group, we recognize that God is still alive. He is still God. He still has the love, the power, and the grace all that we need. And that's true for the church today. He hasn't gotten any smaller.
Recently, I spoke to a bunch of children, and I don't know if it's still done or not. When I was a child, there were always challenges. Are you being called to be a missionary? Are you willing to be a missionary? Well, I did that with those children, and it was truly exciting. The question was, if God calls you to be a missionary, are you willing to say yes? Will you do it? 100+ kids came forward. Yeah, God's at work. There's hope. He's still calling. And there's still people that want to do it. There's children, there's young people, they want to do it.
Yep.
That's great. Praise the Lord for that. That's always encouraging to hear. So, I appreciate you taking the time to share with us today. We covered a lot of different things, but I just wanted to end with an open-ended question. Is there anything else you want to share? Anything you felt we missed, or anything you just think is worth sharing today?
Oh, do you have something you would add?
The job's not done. We can't forget the job where we are locally. Cannot forget that. But we can't forget the job far away, because the need for people to hear the good news, some have never heard yet, and we want to. We just remind people that the job's not done.
Yeah, and I would say that when we came back with joy. No regrets, joy. And we continue to have that joy as we watch them take off and do what God can only do through them, you know. So there's joy in it all.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you for sharing and just giving us some of your time as you share about your ministry and ways to inspire. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to be guests on our podcast today. So thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Jeff.
Thank you. It's great to talk with you.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast. Be on the lookout for how God does uncommon work in common life. And please subscribe to never miss an episode.